Hello and welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, where we place emotion at the heart of the people, the processes and the place of work to create teams, organizations and individuals who feel safe, confident and optimistic. And the focus of this episode today and this little mini series that's going to be coming, so over the next 3 or 4 episodes, we're going to be focusing on high performing teams and the role that emotion in particular plays in creating those high performing teams. Because one of the things that I was reflecting on just yesterday, actually, was how you can't think your way into high performance. So if we want our teams to be high performing, emotion is the thing that's going to get them there. Because you do not ever have a team that is high performing and is devoid of emotion. Emotion is the thing that drives performance. And so if we want to put high performance and high performing teams in particular in our organizations, then emotion has to be central to what it is that we're doing. And over the last, 2, maybe 2.5 years, we've done a lot of work with a lot of teams in the construction industry in particular to think about what is it then that creates a high performing team. And what we've then developed is a blueprint for high performing teams, one that we haven't tested beyond construction. So that's part of what this series is about, really, is to share our thinking so that we can then see how it lands and how it might test and apply in other areas as well. And also we're sharing our experiences in terms of what are some of the strategies and the techniques that we use to help create those high performing teams. We're also going to showcase some of the work that we've done with particular clients. Some of the episodes are going to have some guests on as well, so it won't just be me, although today is a just me episode. So we're really excited about sharing our thinking and hopefully helping you, fair listener, empower spaces, teams and individuals to feel safe, confident, optimistic, and I guess then ultimately be high performing. So why am I saying then you can't think your way into high performance? And I suppose it's because the essence of what sits behind a high performing team is the way that individuals and the team itself engage with their emotions and their relationships with each other. So how the emotions are used and harnessed in the different areas that we think about within the blueprint are really, really important. Now, I'm not saying, it could come across like I'm saying you don't think, there's no thinking happening in high performing teams, and that's not the case at all. So when we think about, if we want a team to be high performing, the chances are that there are some pressures on that team, whether it be pressures to perform, pressures to deliver some outcomes for customers or clients or colleagues. And there'll also be a time imperative that will sit around it, and there'll be a quality requirement for the quality of the work that we do. Now, what we've noticed in the construction clients that we worked with, and within construction, they talk about the triangle. There's a description of a triangle, and on those 3 points are time, quality, and cost. So time being the deadlines that you need to hit, the program that you've got, or the schedule that you have, quality being the quality of the work that you're doing, and then the cost, and then cost being how much you're spending. And when pressure is on, whether it be time pressure, cost pressure, quality pressure, what that will do is bring emotion with it. And when individuals and then into then groups or into teams are emotionally charged, those emotions are taking capacity away from thinking. So if we think about, so one of the areas in the blueprint that we want to think that we know are crucial to high performing teams, as mundane and boring as it sounds, is meetings. So the types of meetings that we have, the duration, the frequency of the meetings that happen, and the quality of the meetings that occur and what happens in those meetings are hugely influential in terms of how well the team performs and how high performing that team might be. And so you might be thinking, well, why is that the case, Phil? Because it's in those meetings that you are often discussing pressures. So you're discussing maybe whether work quality isn't as good as it needs to be. You're discussing that we may be concerned about our timelines and hitting the deadlines we need to hit. We might be concerned about cost if we're doing a cost review. And because there's pressure on those things, that will bring emotion with it. Now, I don't know what emotions they may be. We see often fear. We often see frustration and anger. We often see offense. We also sometimes see contempt as well, in terms of how people are feeling about those different areas. Now, if we can harness those emotions and use them in a constructive way in those meetings, then what will then flow or permeate out from those meetings is the kind of things we want to have for high performance. Whereas if those meetings are combative, if those meetings are argumentative, if those meetings are ones where we've got destructive behaviors happening, they will permeate out across the rest of the team as well. So how we behave in the interactions that we have is absolutely vital for the likelihood of which the team is going to be high performing. So meetings is one of 8. So there are 8 different levers or 8 different areas that we focus on within the blueprint. We're going to talk about 4 of those areas today. And then in another episode, we're going to talk about 4 more. And what I want to do is to move into thinking about what are some of the techniques and strategies that we use against each of those different areas that help then get the teams that we work with to be at a point where they are high performing. I will also give you some reflective questions to think about as we work our way through. So there'll be that usual moment where I encourage you to pause the episode, have a think about a question that I pose for you, and then get ready to press play and come back to the episode as and when you are ready. And what I guess I wanted to do in this first section is to outline why this is something that's so important to us and for us. Okay. So let's move into our different areas then. Let's move into the different levers that we talk about in terms of creating high performing teams, and we'll stick with the one that I've opened with already, which is meetings. So how do we create high performing meetings for high performing teams? So first things first. Why are we here? So one of my favorite mnemonics that I use when it comes to meetings, I was introduced by a good friend of mine called Chris Polaris. And he introduced me to the mnemonic of POST. POST meaning P for purpose, O for outcome, S for structure, and T for timing. So one of the things that drains performance is meetings. Meetings suck time out of every single project. So whether you be on a construction site or elsewhere, meetings suck time away. And so therefore, if you want your team to be high performing, if you want your project to be high performing, how you manage your time is absolutely crucial. And so therefore, meetings must be something that add value to the project and drive performance forwards. And one of the things that often happens, especially when you've been as a team for a while or you've been on a project for a while, is we forget the reason that we come together. So every single meeting that you have in your team, every single meeting that you have on your site has to have a post. What's the purpose? Why does this meeting exist? And within that purpose, it should detail what questions are we trying to answer, what problems are we trying to solve, what situations are we trying to address? What's the purpose of this meeting? What's it here to, why is this meeting here? And then the O of post is the outcome. What does this meeting deliver? And so therefore, we should have a, by the end of this meeting, we will, because we know what the outcomes are. So if this is a risks and opportunities workshop, as an example, what's the purpose of this meeting? This meeting is here to identify what risks and opportunities may be available to us, what risks we might need to manage, what opportunities might be available to improve productivity and or performance against program and or manage our costs, depending on what the focus is. So that's the purpose of why it's there. The outcome. By the end of this meeting, we will have a collated list of risks with associated mitigating actions and owners allocated against each of the risks and the mitigating actions with dates for review and or completion. By the end of this meeting, we will also have a collated list of opportunities with the expected benefits to be realized with an owner attached and then a date by which either an update or the completion of that opportunity needs to have happened, so that we're really clear on what we're doing. So if, for example, we get then sort of taken down a bit of a rabbit hole of something that might be happening on site or some frustration that we've got with a subcontractor or with a client or with a third party, we can say, great, that's wonderful that thing's really important to you. And right now we're doing risks and opportunities. Is what you're describing a risk? No. Is it an opportunity? No. Then it's something for a different meeting. So make sure you write that down and bring it to another meeting that we might have at some point. So by having a really clear purpose and a really clear outcome, it keeps you focused and it keeps your meetings on track and where they need to be. So then we need to think about structure, which is the S of post. So who is involved in this meeting and what expertise are they bringing with them? We also might want to think about what role or roles exist and who's completing them. So for example, does this meeting have a chair? If so, who is chairing? And what are their responsibilities as chair? Are they there to make sure we cover all the items on the agenda? Are they there to make sure that everybody's heard? Are they there to ensure accurate recording of actions and owners? What are they there to do? We also might need a decider. So who is the person in this meeting that makes a decision? So if we're coming up with risks and opportunities and there's a risk that we might decide to accept rather than manage, who makes that decision? Who's the one who can say, yeah, that's fine, we'll just take that risk. I'm happy to take the risk. Let's just take the risk and not do anything to mitigate or manage that risk. Who has that role? Who is the decider? What are the agenda items? Are there standing agenda items? What are the expectations that we have? So is the expectation that people are preparing beforehand? If so, what are they preparing? What's the expectation on completing actions or updating on actions? Also, how do we capture what we discuss? Are we having minutes? Are we having an action log? What is it that we're doing and how are we doing it? And by being clear on all of those things, it makes your meetings much more efficient. Because if you know, for example, who your decider is, then if there's a debate and we can't agree, everyone can just go, well, what do you think, Phil? You're the decider. That's your role today. Well, then we're going to do this. And away we go. Similarly, then, when we think about timing, we're thinking, well, how often does this meeting happen? So what's its frequency? We're also thinking about what's its duration. And also, if we've got, 10 agenda items, how are we managing those 10 agenda items? Do we do them each one until it's done, or does each one have a defined time limit? That kind of stuff. So how are we organizing the time that sits around it? So one of the first things we'll do with the project or with the team that we're involved in is say, what is your meeting structure and what is each meeting for and what does it do? And if we can't get a consistent answer, which often we don't, I'll be honest, that's one of the first things we'll put in place, is to have a post for every meeting that is happening, because that way everyone knows why it's there. There's nothing more frustrating for me than being invited to a meeting and I don't know why I'm there. So I just kind of turn up, and because I turn up ill prepared, I don't know what I'm there to do. I don't know what we're doing. I don't know what I'm adding. And if we don't know that, how can we be clear on it? Now, it might be that, and we've had this before, where the post is so, when we've implemented post and it then becomes clear, that creates then a standard for that meeting. And maybe we don't need the post every time because people know what we're there and why we're there to have it. And I would argue that, and I would argue and say that we still refer back to it if we think the meeting is going off on a tangent or going somewhere that it shouldn't be going, because that's not what the meeting is there to do. Okay. So the second thing on meetings then is the ways that we interact with each other. How do we interact with each other when we meet together? In particular, we're looking at how well do we listen? How well do we listen to each other in the meetings that we're in? Because often what will happen is two people will be saying the same thing, but from a slightly different point of view, and then we end up losing half an hour just debating something where actually people were 90% aligned. We just needed to bring them together. So it's the how do we engage with each other? And in particular, one thing I would encourage you to look at or look out for is the types of metaphor that we use when we meet. So, for example, if something isn't working, something isn't going very well, what metaphor do we use to do that? Are we using, so common ones that I hear, something might be on fire. Something might need attention. Something is a shit show. Something is a mess. Okay. So what metaphor are we using then to describe it? Because the metaphor that we choose says a lot about how we feel about a particular thing. And so if we're saying something is on fire, is it actually on, like, is it literally on fire? So something being on fire then, or using the metaphor of on fire, means it's something that is dangerous, something that can spread, something that can cause harm, something that needs to be put out or extinguished. Now, I don't know what might be on fire, and using that metaphor tells us something about how we feel about whatever it is that's not going particularly well. So paying attention to the metaphor that's used, and if appropriate, testing that. To what extent do we test that metaphor to go, is that what you mean though? Because if you're saying this thing, as an example, is on fire, then that's meaning that it's something that can cause harm, that's dangerous, and all the things that I listed before. So pay attention to the metaphor that are used in meetings, because they tell us something about how people are thinking and feeling about what's being discussed. So one of our first levers that we look for is meetings. In particular then, what's the purpose, what's the outcome, what's the structure, what's the timing? And so if you're thinking about how do you want your team to be high performing, how do you get the people that work with you for you to be high performing, meetings are something that can either propel performance forward or they can drag performance down. And where on that spectrum are your meetings right now? And then what might you want to do to put that right? So think about a meeting that you have that you think is a something that sort of drags performance down. And then to what extent does it have a purpose, an outcome, a structure, and timing? So that's my reflection question for you. Think about a meeting that you go to that you know what you feel drags performance down. And then if you were to create one, then what would be the purpose? What would be the outcome? What would be the structure? And what would be the timing? So hit pause. When you're ready, come back and we'll go again. All right. So lever number 2 then. And so lever number 2 we're going to look at as the one of accountability. So when we think about a team and a team being high performing, knowing where the accountability for things sits is something that can massively improve the quality of decision making, and it can help the team be much more both effective and efficient in what it does, because it's clear about what accountability people have and where the accountability for something sits. And the other thing about accountability is it changes. So depending on where a team is or where a project is or what's happening, the accountability might change. And it's easy to kind of go, oh, well, everyone knows who's accountable. And so some of the questions that my colleagues and I ask when we go to work with teams around accountability in particular are trying to flush that out. So we're trying to flush out, actually, is it clear where the accountability for something sits? So questions that we would ask include, if I wanted to get a decision made on signing off a £25,000 investment, who would I need to go to? Because what that's trying to pull out is, where does the accountability for something sit? So it could be that there's a financial accountability. So it could be I've got to go and see a QS, or I need to go and see a commercial lead. It could be that it sits with the PM and I need to go and see the project manager to find out what that is. It could be that it sits somewhere else. But the point is, by asking that question of a number of different people, if we get inconsistent answers, then that tells us the accountability is unclear. Similarly, if I wanted to change the sequence or an order to how we do something, who would I need to go to get that signed off? So let's say we programmed out for activity A, then B, then C to happen, or A and B happen together and then C happens afterwards. So if I wanted to do A, B, and C all together at the same time, who would I need to go to get that signed off? And again, if the answer is inconsistent, then that tells us accountability is unclear. Now, it might be that my questions feel too vague and ambiguous, and we would be more specific. So I don't know, as an example, if it was, say, a civils construction project where we're we're putting some drainage in, for example, and I wanted to change the sequence of which the drainage was going to go in, then I could go, well, who would I need to go to for that then? Or if I wanted to change the sequence of the traffic management, where would I go to for that? So you can be more specific, or you can be more kind of generic, depending on what the project is and what the team is. The intent behind the question, though, is to identify common areas of concern, and typically they can be money related, they can be program or schedule related, or time related, and they can be quality related. And because we come back to that kind of triangle of time, quality, and cost, because they often drive what's happening in a project, knowing where the accountability lies for elements that sit in each of those different areas can be really helpful for us. And so being clear on the accountability, where the accountability lies and who it sits with, is really, really important. Now, one of the things we often find is that the answer we get is, well, it sits with two people. So it might sit with the commercial lead and the project manager. It might sit with the QS and the supervisor, as examples. And one of the difficulties with that is that having two people accountable means that the efficiency of any decision making is slow, because you now have to get two people aligned to make a decision. So I would argue that when you think about accountability, there can only ever be one person who's accountable for whatever it is that you're looking at. We should aim to have one person accountable for something, because then that makes the process efficient. So when it comes to accountability, what we're looking at in particular is where the accountability is blurry or unsure or unclear, because that stops the team performing because they don't know where to go when they need to make a decision on something. So my question for you then, fair listener, is in the team that you're in or the team that you're thinking about, how clear are the accountabilities within that team? How clear is everyone who in terms of who is accountable for what? Now you might think, well, Phil, surely this is just like a RACI or a RACI matrix where you have responsible, accountable, consultant, informed. And yes, you can use that kind of matrix, and we do use that matrix when we think about accountability. My point is that when we begin with who would I go to for that? And if it's unclear or inconsistent, that tells us that accountability is a lever that we need to pull. So my question one last time then, as I encourage you to pause and reflect for a second time, is thinking about the team that you're involved in, or thinking about the team that you've got in mind when you're listening to this episode of the podcast, how clear are the accountabilities and where they sit? Okay, so if you pause, and then when you're ready, hit play, then we'll come back and we'll look at area number 3. All right, welcome back. So area number 3 then is decision making. Now there is an overlap between accountability and decision making, and in our blueprint we put these two close together for that exact reason, really. That if the accountability is unclear, the decision making it typically is poor. So if the accountabilities are unclear, decision making tends to be poor. Now you can still have clear accountability and poor decision making. So decision making then as a section for us then is about the ways that we go about making decisions. And in particular, that is, how do we disagree? How do we bring in as many different perspectives as we can? How do we disagree about those perspectives to make a decision to take it forward? So partly decision making is about that clear accountability. Who has the accountability to make this decision? The next bit of accountability, of decision making, then, is how do we go about making those decisions? One of the things that we encourage our clients to do is to think about that perspective taking. Now, sometimes people like Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats is one method that you can use. You can also use different perspective taking techniques. So we think about a decision from the perspective of colleagues, or we think about a decision from the perspective of the client, or we think about a decision from the perspective of whoever the different stakeholders are that may be involved. And one of my favorite ways of looking at decision making is to use a technique called a pre-mortem. So I was first introduced to a pre-mortem when I read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And the idea of a pre-mortem is where you catalogue the cataclysmic failure of the decision that you're taking. So you look at the decision that you're going to make, and then you kind of plot out its cataclysmic failure. And the intent here is to try and to pull out the biases, heuristics, the assumptions that you've made in the decision-making process that you have, so that you can make better decisions. And the way that we would go about doing that then is to make the decision that we need to make. And before we go and implement that, I would then ask everybody in the room to grab themselves a pen and a piece of paper, and to write down some bullet points in response to some prompts that I'm going to give. And when we do a pre-mortem, and the term pre-mortem is the idea of because in a post-mortem you unpick something. You if it was an actual post-mortem, you would dissect something, but you're looking to sort of look at something quite in a very detailed way to figure out what happened and what went wrong. With a pre-mortem, You're trying to predict what might go wrong. And you want to do that from a place of reflection. So the opening prompt is: the failure of this decision began when? So the failure of this decision, or the failure of the decision we took, began when? And then what made it worse was? Which was compounded by? And then to top it all off. So those prompts are intended to be used to allow people to write down bullet point responses to each of those. Now, it's important that people do this independently and individually. It can feel a bit awkward because you're asking people to do it in silence, really. And then what we do afterwards is we get everybody to tell the story of the cataclysmic failure of this decision. And then what you're looking to do is identify patterns and trends in the cataclysmic failure to then think about what you might want to do, differently going forward. And what pre-mortems do, when used well and when used consistently, is they improve the quality of the decision making, because we're thinking through the risks, the pitfalls, the potential things that might trip us up before we make the decision. Now, the risk is it can get a bit monotonous if you do it like for every single decision that you're making. So that's so I suppose there's a risk of me saying that, because if you're deciding whether to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, to then do the pre-mortem on everything, on each of those decisions would be a bit much. And at the same time, when you're thinking about a decision that will affect multiple people or will affect the quality of the work that we're doing, or will affect the cost of what we're doing, or will affect the time that we've got to do it in, so that classic kind of program or cost, time, quality triangle. When you've got a decision that's going to impact 2 out of those 3, you definitely want to be doing a pre-mortem on it, because that's going to help you make, I would argue, help you make better decisions. We know it does help people make better decisions. So pre-mortems is one of the tactics, one of the strategies, the techniques that we use to improve the quality of decision making. As I said, there are other ones that you might want to think about as well. So Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats can be a good one because of the different perspectives that you have, or another perspective taking approach could work as well. So think about a decision that was made in your team recently that had an impact on 1 or 2 of those 3 elements of cost, time, and quality. And if you'd have done a pre-mortem on it, what might you have found? Or maybe think about a decision that you've got to make that impacts time, cost, and quality, and think about what would the pre-mortem be, and using the prompts that I outlined earlier on. So the failure began when, and use the rest of the prompts that are in there to help you. Okay, so have a think about a decision that you need to make or has been made. When would a pre-mortem have helped, or what would the pre-mortem be? And pause the episode, and when you're ready, hit play, come back, and we will go again. And welcome back for the 4th and final time then, for this episode. So the final section that we're going to look at for today then is around relationships. And this one can be quite hard to pin down. So accountability, decision making in meetings can be well, we talked about the post that you can do in meetings, the ways you can find out where accountability sits, and the pre-mortem that you can do for decision making, whereas relationships can be more complicated in terms of, because what we're looking for here in relationships is the quality of the relationships that exist, and also the quantity of relationships that exist. So how do we assess them then? So partly we assess them through observation. So we assess them when we get together with a team by looking at the ways that people speak with each other. How do they interact? What's their interaction style like? Is it supportive? Is it challenging? And the risk is that when I say is it supportive, is it challenging, you might think, well, it could be both of those things, and absolutely it can be both of those things. And I think it's about the way that relationship is described can be really helpful. So when we begin work with a team, we will ask people to describe what it's like, to describe what it's like to work on the project, describe what it's like to work with a particular subcontractor, or what's it like to work with a client, or what's it like to work with or to interact and engage with other people. So we have a combination of data gathering that we'll do through discussion and conversation, and also then data gathering that we will do through observation in terms of how do we observe the relationships between people, or between organizations, or between teams, so that we can get to a point where they're high performing. Because those relationships need to be more than nice. Nice relationships don't get us high performing. So being nice to each other doesn't equal a high performing team. So those relationships need to have challenge. There needs to be challenge and disagreement in that relationship. And that challenge and disagreement needs to be done in a constructive way. There needs to be support and reinforcement and having each other's back. So that support, that equal support and equal challenge, is really important in the relationships that we have. There needs to be trust in that relationship. Can people trust each other? Because in a high-performing team, you are reliant on your colleagues. They need to do things to help you do what you need to do, and you need to do things to help your colleagues do what they need to do. So the quality of the relationships that exist across the team are a huge contributing factor to the extent to which the team then is going to be high performing. So when we think about relationships, we're considering the level of trust that exists. We're considering the level of support for each other. We're also considering the level of challenge and disagreement that is brought with each other. And we're also interested in the compassion and the understanding of where other people are coming from. Because if we're only sort of ploughing our own furrow, or pushing our own agenda, or doing our own thing, if we only ever think about it from our perspective, then that high-performing team bit isn't going to work. So we'll often assess behaviour through observation and through the questions that we ask to establish the extent to which there is trust, there's support, there's challenge, and there's compassion and understanding for each other as well. Now, compassion and understanding doesn't mean, it needs to be clear, that doesn't mean that you can't hold people to account, because the extent that how we hold people to account and how we help people be accountable for the decisions that they've made and the actions they've taken is really important. And if we can understand, if we can understand and be compassionate about the situations that they're in, we can do that too. It's about being hard on the problem. How do we be hard on the problem and considerate of the people? It's something that I often discuss with teams. We need to be hard on the problem, because the problem is something we need to solve, and we need to be compassionate on the people at the same time. So when you think about relationships in either your team or a team that you know well, to what extent is there trust? To what extent is there support? To what extent is there challenge? And to what extent is there compassion? So what might we be looking for in our observations then? So if we think about support, what happens after a meeting or after an interaction. People going around and talking about each other behind their back. Are they slagging them off behind their back? Did they come out of a meeting or have an interaction or a discussion and say, "Oh, I can't believe," blah, blah, blah. Because what that suggests then is the quality of the relationship isn't there because I couldn't say it to their face. So how the stories that we tell about each other and the stories that we tell about our colleagues and the stories that we tell about the other individuals that we work with are really important when we think about relationships. So again, one of the questions that I'll ask when we come in to do some analysis at the beginning of working with a team is, what stories do we hear? What stories do get told a lot? Because those stories can be quite insightful in terms of the quality of the relationships that exist on the project or in the team. So yeah, for the last time then, let's pause. Thinking about the project or the team that you know well or you're involved in, to what extent is there trust, is there challenge, is there support, and is there that compassion and understanding for each other? So hit pause when you're ready, come back, hit play, and we'll go again. So I think I said welcome back for the last time. The last time you came back, and clearly I was wrong because we have one more to go. So apologies for that. And we're going to bring this episode to an end now. So what we've looked at is that within our Blueprint for High Performing Teams, we've got 8 areas or 8 levers that we look to pull. Today, we've looked at accountability, decision-making, relationships, and meetings. I suppose I should do them in the order that we did them, really, shouldn't I? So we've done meetings, accountability, decision-making, and relationships. And that leaves us next time then to think about well-being, performance, recognition, and communication. What we've also covered off is the strategies and techniques that we use, some of the examples of the strategies and techniques we use under each area to help you think about either the team that you work in or a team you know well and the extent to which they are high-performing. So for now, I will say thank you so much, fair listener, for your time and for your attention over this episode. And we'll look forward to seeing you for the next one in the series when we think about emotion at work in high-performing teams.